You are about to hear something you were never meant to know. It will change the way you see time, the way you see yourself, and the way you see the thin wall between reality and whatever waits outside it. I'm not telling you this to entertain you. I'm telling you this because once you understand what happened in St. Elric's, you will recognize the signs when they appear in your own world, and by then, you will need to decide whether to run or to follow. Most who follow do not come back the same. Some do not come back at all. There is no official record of Elias Granger's arrival, not in the hospital's archives, not in municipal logs, not even in the memories of those tasked with guarding the doors that night. Yet at precisely 3:12 a.m., November the 7th, 1893, under the low hiss of gaslight in St. Elric's infirmary, a boy stood in the entranceway. He did not knock. He did not speak. He simply existed as though he had been there for a very long time, waiting for the world to notice him. The nurse on duty met his eyes. She never spoke again for the rest of her life. Her vocal cords were intact. Her mind was intact, but something in her refused to release sound. Witnesses said she looked as though she was still listening to him, decades later, for words that never finished leaving his mouth. The hallway chilled, not like a draft, but like the air itself had been replaced. The old brass thermometers disagreed, 0 degrees in pediatrics, 47 in surgical. A paradox. Instruments fogged, metal warped. The sensation spread outward, a quiet ripple, until even the building seemed to tense. The boy appeared to be about 10 years old, or 8. Witnesses could not agree. His eyes were black, or blue, or absent entirely. His face was too symmetrical, unnervingly precise, like a memory of a child redrawn by someone who had never seen one in life. His clothes were clean, unbranded. A single sample of the fabric, later smuggled to a laboratory, returned a result the technicians refused to put in writing. Not cotton, not silk, not wool, not synthetic. No match in the known polymer families. One scientist burned his notes and resigned within the hour. Nurse Cale, against her better judgment, tried to take his vitals. She placed the stethoscope against his chest. No heartbeat. She took his pulse. Nothing. She leaned in close. No breath. The boy blinked, tilted his head slightly, and asked, "Why do you people always start with the heart?" Her stethoscope hit the floor. Overhead the lights flickered. 4 mechanical security doors slid shut without power or command. The boy stood motionless. The building's systems adjusted around him, as though it recognized a higher authority in its presence. At 3:21 a.m., he was escorted, gently without resistance, into exam room 9. 2 doctors, 3 nurses, and a single technician surrounded him. He answered questions before they were asked. Some thought it was precognition. They were wrong. Precognition sees forward. This was something else. He remembered what had not yet happened. They attempted an MRI. The machine didn't fail. It inverted. Power surged backwards. The casing grew warm, then blistered, then split, burning its own instruction manual into charred curls. The image produced was not the boy. It was the technician, seated in the same posture, staring into the lens with an expression he swore he had never made. They tried again. The image was static. Beneath the static, faint laughter. "You can't scan something," the boy said quietly. "That was never meant to be known." The staff began to dream of each other's thoughts. Clocks in different wings fell out of sync by whole minutes. Air vents breathed in reverse. Finally, a nurse asked him his name. What came out was not language. It was the sound of glass cracking under deep water, a syllable older than thought, a vibration that lodged in bone. Recording devices failed instantly. Every person present still remembers it in their marrow. By dawn, St. Elric's was no longer just a hospital. It had become a place where the line between what is and what isn't had begun to fray. The boy was not there for treatment. He was not there for shelter. He was there to inspect. And when something inspects you, it is already deciding what to do with you. For 3 days, Elias Granger did not move from the far left corner of exam room 9. The staff brought him food. He never touched it. They brought him water. He did not drink. They tried to sedate him. The needle never pierced skin. It slid sideways as though the flesh beneath was rearranging itself to avoid the intrusion. Every second he stood there, facing the wall, was a second in which the hospital began to notice things that should not happen, things that had no name. Nurse Cale swore the wall in front of him was not the same wall they'd built. The paint was whiter than fresh snow, though no one had repainted it. The texture was wrong, too smooth, like the surface of bone. Once, when the nurse's hand brushed it by accident, she pulled away instantly. Her palm was warm, but the wall was colder than ice. On the morning of the fourth day, the routine ended. A technician swiped her badge, entered the security code, and pulled open the heavy door to room 9. Only, there was no door. There was no room. Where it should have been was a perfectly seamless corridor. No hinge marks, no door frame, no trace of construction. The floor tile continued without interruption, as though the space had always been hallway. Administrators panicked. Construction crews were brought in. They smashed through the wall where the blueprint insisted room 9 should be. Behind it, nothing. No dust lines where the wall met the floor. No shadow of removed furniture. No cavity at all. It was not that the room had been sealed. It was that the room had never existed in the first place. Yet in the hospital's electronic systems, room 9 still registered as occupied. The lock system still recognized its code, and the oldest set of blueprints still showed its measurements, exactly 9 feet by 9 feet, like a perfect cube. That night, a janitor walking the east wing noticed something at the far end of an unused C. Corridor. A door. No number, no sign. Wrong color. It was pale grey, its surface strangely soft-looking, and it stood slightly ajar. When he stepped toward it, the frame inhaled, slow and deep, pulling the air toward it in a silent breath. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The moment his shadow fell across the threshold, a low hum began, somewhere inside his head, as if the sound were not entering his ears but being manufactured directly in his thoughts. He backed away. By the time he returned with security, the door was gone. The next night, it appeared again. Different corridor, same pale grey surface, still breathing. An internal policy was issued quietly. If you encounter an unmarked door, do not approach, do not touch, do not acknowledge its presence. The first attempt to photograph it failed. The image came back not black, not blurred, white, and at the very bottom margin of the developed film, in faint pencil, were 3 words no one claimed to have written: "Stop looking for me." They ignored the warning. 7 men from a special containment unit were brought in to force it open. It took all their combined strength. 3 vomited without warning. 1 passed out. Another collapsed to his knees, clutching his skull, whispering about a child's humming echoing inside his brain. When the hinges finally gave, the door swung inward without sound. Behind it was no room. It was a hallway spiraling inward like a conch shell, tiled like the hospital, but curving too steeply for any physical structure to contain. They sent a small camera drone inside. It traveled 218 feet before the video feed went black, but the audio continued for exactly 7 minutes. The voice of a child repeating the same sentence over and over. "I am not from here. I am not from here. I am not from here." At 6 minutes, the voice slowed. At 7, it stopped. Then came screaming, human screaming, layered and overlapping as though dozens of people were in agony inside the same space. Then, silence. When they retrieved the drone, the memory card was gone, not erased, gone. The compartment where it had been installed was empty. The operator who had controlled the drone went home that night and began writing mathematical symbols on his apartment walls in his own blood. The shapes did not match any known formula until, hours later, Elias stepped calmly out of the spiral hallway. He was the same age, same clothes, but his eyes were not human anymore. They were pools of polished black stone reflecting no light. "Where did you go?" someone asked. He tilted his head. "I found the place where your rules don't work." From that day forward, time inside St. Elric's began to slide. Different departments reported different dates. One wing thought it was 1954. Another thought it was March 3rd, 2031. Some clocks displayed nothing at all. Time drift is not a malfunction. It is a signal. It means the building you are in has stopped obeying the single version of reality you live in. Once that anchor slips, you are no longer inside the building. You are inside something else's memory of it, and once you're inside that memory, you're already being edited. By the second week after Elias's return from the spiral hallway, St. Elric's was no longer functioning as a hospital. Outwardly, the building still looked the same to passers-by: tall, weathered brick, narrow windows, the faint smell of disinfectant carried by the wind. Ambulances still came. Patients still arrived. but inside the corridors had begun to fold into each other in ways that no human architect had ever designed. A nurse walking from pediatrics to the cafeteria would find herself, without warning, stepping out into the radiology wing 3 floors below. A doctor on the main stairwell would open a door to what should have been the fire escape and find a dim hallway lined with doors marked in symbols that none of the staff could read. These symbols were not carved or painted. They were part of the material itself, as though the wall had grown them. Elias moved freely through all of it. He didn't carry a key. He didn't swipe a badge. No lock resisted him, and no space seemed strange to him. When asked where a hallway led, he would answer without hesitation, even if the hallway had not been there the day before. The staff stopped questioning him directly after a surgeon asked, "What are you looking for?" And Elias smiled faintly before replying, "You, but not yet." It was on the 15th night that the first return happened. At 2:44 a.m., security cameras caught a man stepping into the lobby. His hair was wet. His clothes were dated, early 1900s style, wool coat, high collar, scuffed boots. He appeared confused but not panicked. He asked the receptionist for Dr. Bellamy. No one by that name had worked at St. Elric's in over 90 years. When they checked the old archives, there was a patient file dated 1911 for a man with the exact same name, age, and facial features. The file ended abruptly. The final entry: disappeared from room 9, presumed dead, but he was, standing in the lobby as if no time had passed at all. The man became agitated when shown modern currency, unable to comprehend it. He kept asking what year it was. When told, he grew pale and whispered, "I took the left hallway." The humming stopped, and then he broke off, shaking violently, his eyes darting toward the elevators. "It's still here, isn't it? The thing that makes the air breathe." He was gone by sunrise. No one saw him leave. Cameras recorded only static during the time frame of his disappearance. In the days that followed, more returns occurred. A woman in a blood-soaked nurse's uniform from 1946 appeared in the storage wing, clutching a tray of instruments no one recognized. 2 children in matching grey clothing wandered out of the morgue, both smiling faintly, eyes clouded white. Neither spoke. They vanished an hour later. Patterns emerged. Every returnee had one thing in common. They had been in room 9 at the time of their original disappearance, but according to the hospital's blueprints, room 9 had never existed. Elias seemed to know when a return would happen. He would be standing quietly in the exact location where the person would emerge, waiting with the calm of someone greeting an old friend. He spoke to them softly, in a language no one could place, touching their hand or shoulder. Sometimes they stayed. Sometimes they followed him through a door that was not there a moment earlier. They never came back. One night, a young intern decided to follow. She waited in the hallway, watching Elias approach a returnee, a boy no older than 12, wearing a wool cap and clutching a leather-bound book. Elias knelt, spoke to him, and then guided him toward a plain white wall. Without warning, they stepped forward and vanished into it, as though it were a curtain of water. The intern ran toward the wall and slammed into it, solid, cold. She pressed her ear against it and heard faint breathing, steady, slow, impossibly deep. Then, beneath the breathing, a whisper, "Turn around." She did. Elias was standing behind her alone. "You're not supposed to see yet," he said. And then he was gone. From that point on, the hospital's layout became unstable. Elevators opened to hallways that sloped upward at impossible angles. Stairwells ended in blank walls. One wing's windows now looked out over a black void. No city, no sky, no stars. Just endless nothing. Doctors began keeping journals, not of their patients, but of the building's changes. One entry read, "West corridor gained 3 doors overnight. Middle door has no handle, smells like rain." Another, "Operating theater ceiling now appears to be glass. Something moving on the other side." The administration considered closing the hospital, but no one could agree on where outside was anymore. The front doors sometimes opened to the street. Other times they opened to places that could not exist. An endless forest of white trees under a red sky, a frozen shore with no horizon, a stone hallway lined with mirrors that reflected people who weren't in the room. Through it all, Elias walked calmly, unhurried, as if everything was unfolding exactly as it should. And perhaps it was. Because St. Elric's was no longer a hospital, it was becoming something else, something that remembered all the people it had ever taken and was now letting some of them back. But the building was not giving them back to the same world. By the 22nd night, the staff who still remained at St. Elric's had stopped asking when this would end. They didn't quit, didn't resign, didn't even try to leave, not because they weren't afraid, but because the concept of leaving had lost its meaning. The main entrance sometimes led to the street outside, but if you stepped through, you might find yourself walking into a dim corridor you'd never seen before, only to circle back to the nurse's station without taking a single turn. The first confirmed loop happened at 3:19 a.m. Two orderlies carrying supplies toward the east wing reached the double doors at the corridor's end. They pushed through and found themselves stepping into the same hallway they'd just walked down, same floor, same paint chips on the wall, same flickering light. They tried again, and again. 5 times they passed through the doors, each time arriving exactly where they'd started. On the 6th attempt, they emerged into a room that did not exist on any map. A vast, dark chamber with no ceiling, only a black expanse stretching upward forever. The walls were wet. Something was moving in the dark above them. They didn't speak of what they saw, but afterward both men refused to pass through any unmarked door in the hospital. One of them began muttering under his breath every time he walked the halls, repeating the same phrase over and over. You have to remember who you are before you go in. Patients noticed the changes too. Those who had been admitted before the distortions began started reporting strange dreams, identical dreams. In them, they were standing at the far end of a white hallway. A single door waited at the other end, breathing slowly, pulling them toward it. Some said they resisted. Others admitted they reached for the handle, but before they could touch it, they would wake up with blood on their fingertips. One patient, a man, recovering from surgery, claimed the dream wasn't a dream at all. He insisted he had opened the door, walked through, and spent what felt like days in a vast underground place filled with hundreds of other people, some wearing hospital gowns, others dressed in clothing from decades past. It's not a hallway, he whispered to a nurse. It's a station, and they're all waiting for something to call them. When the nurse asked what that something was, the man leaned closer. It wears your face, but it's not you, and once it finds you, you won't come back the same. The nurse didn't believe him until the following morning, when she passed him in the hall and realized his eyes were no longer the same color. By now, Elias had started speaking more often. He would stop in front of a doctor, a patient, even a security guard, and say something short, almost like a warning, before walking away. The statements were strange, disconnected. When the wall blinks, don't look back. Some of the people here aren't people. If you see yourself, you have to kill it. No one understood what he meant until a night shift nurse encountered her own duplicate in the laundry wing. The second version of her stood perfectly still, smiling faintly, as if posing for an unseen camera. It didn't breathe. It didn't blink. The nurse ran, but she swore she could hear it following her without making a sound. When she told Elias, he only said, "It hasn't decided yet." The returns were happening daily now. Some appeared for only seconds before vanishing. Others stayed for hours, walking the halls aimlessly. Many seemed confused about where or when they were. A few claimed to remember dying, only to wake up in the hospital again. One man insisted he'd been buried in 1974 and could describe the exact location of his grave. When authorities dug there, they found an empty coffin. The building itself began showing signs of awareness. Lights would flicker in patterns that matched the beeping of a patient's heart monitor. The elevator would open on its own whenever Elias passed, no matter how far away he was. And sometimes, in the dead of night, every clock in the building would stop at the same time, 3:12 a.m., the exact minute Elias had first appeared. On the 25th night, the staff gathered in the cafeteria to discuss evacuation. No one had seen the outside world in days. The windows showed nothing recognizable, sometimes an ocean, sometimes endless desert, sometimes black space filled with moving shapes too large to comprehend. As they argued, the lights dimmed. A deep, resonant sound vibrated through the floor, as if the entire hospital had drawn in a single massive breath. Every door in the cafeteria opened at once, though no one touched them. Elias entered, walking slowly, his black stone eyes fixed on the staff. "It's almost ready," he said softly. "What is?" someone asked. "The place where your rules don't work," he answered. "It's Finney," she'd remembering. "Now it's going to start making changes. Before anyone could respond, the room's far wall shivered, literally shivered like the surface of water in a sudden gust. And then it began to open, not like a door, more like an eye. At first, no one moved. They stood frozen in the cafeteria, staring at the wall as it continued to ripple like the surface of a pond. The eye, if that's what it was, widened slowly, revealing not a room or hallway beyond, but a depthless black that seemed to drink in the light around it. The air grew heavier. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights dulled to a muffled hum, as if they were suddenly far away. Then came the sound. It was not loud, but it was complete. A deep, resonant tone that seemed to pass through bone and settle into the teeth. It was the kind of sound you didn't hear with your ears, but with the center of your chest. Some of the staff clutched at their ribs. One nurse dropped her coffee cup, though it made no sound when it shattered on the floor. The blackness inside the opening shifted, not an object, more like the suggestion of something vast moving in the dark. The motion wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like the slow turning of a head. Elias stepped forward. His expression did not change, but there was something in his posture, a reverence, a recognition, that made several people step back instinctively. He stopped just short of the opening and tilted his head slightly, as if listening. "It knows you're here," he said quietly, "and now you know it's here." The ripple expanded again, and this time, everyone in the room felt a rush of air, not cold, but unnervingly warm, like exhalation. It carried with it a scent no one could place. For some, it was the smell of the ocean. For others, fresh earth after rain. One doctor swore it was the scent of the blanket his grandmother used to wrap him in as a child. The details varied, but the reaction was the same. Each person felt seen. That sensation shifted quickly to unease. From the blackness, shapes began to form, not coming forward, but rising, like images emerging in developing film. Faces, does, ends of them. Some were familiar, current patients, fellow staff members, even family members who should have been miles away. Others were strangers, but there was something wrong with all of them. Their eyes, not missing, not closed, inverted, as if the gaze had been turned inward. One of the orderlies took a step toward the wall, muttering, "That's my mother. She's calling me." Elias's voice cut sharply through the air. "Don't go." The orderly ignored him and kept walking. As soon as his foot crossed the threshold of the ripple, his entire body went still. The air around him wavered, distorting his shape like heat over asphalt. Then, slowly, he was drawn backward into the blackness, feet first, until he vanished completely. The ripple sealed shut behind him with a sound like a slow breath in reverse. No one else moved. Elias turned to the rest of the group. "It's choosing now," he said simply. Before anyone could ask what that meant, the wall shivered again, but this time it did not open in the same place. Across the cafeteria, another section of wall began to ripple, then another. Within seconds, 5 separate points in the room were distorting, each showing that same depthless black. Some people began backing away toward the kitchen, but that offered no safety. The kitchen door was already rippling. One nurse whispered, "We're surrounded." "No," Elias said. "You've been inside for a long time. This is just when you notice." A sharp metallic sound rang out from the far left ripple, like the strike of a clock. Then another from the opposite wall. With each sound, the room seemed to tilt, though the floor remained level. Some staff grabbed onto tables to keep from falling. The light in the room faded, not as if it were turning off, but as if it were being absorbed into the blackness from all sides. Through the dimness, figures began to emerge from the openings. They were human in shape, but indistinct, their edges soft and shifting like smoke. As they stepped forward, their features solidified into perfect replicas of the people in the room. Each staff member, each patient present, had a duplicate now standing across from them, silent, unmoving. One of the duplicates took a step forward. The original version of that person gasped, clutching at their chest as if their breath had been stolen. The duplicate's lips moved, though no sound came out. Elias's voice rose above the silence. "If it speaks, you must answer. If you answer, you belong to it." The duplicates moved in unison, stepping closer. The originals began to back away, some tripping over chairs, others pressing themselves against the far wall. One young doctor broke and bolted for the hallway. His duplicate turned its head sharply and vanished into a ripple, only to reappear directly in front of him, blocking his path. The room was filled with a low, steady breathing. It was not coming from any single source. It was coming from everywhere. And then, without warning, all of the duplicates spoke at once. One word, the same word, in perfect unison, in a language none of them knew, but every single one of them understood. Closer. Elias closed his eyes. It's feeding now, he whispered. Some of you will leave. None of you will go back the same. The duplicates smiled. The ripples widened. The choice was no longer theirs. The first to fall was Dr. Lanier. Her duplicate stepped forward, touched her face with one trembling hand, and in that moment the real Dr. Lanier's eyes went entirely black. Her breathing stopped, not because she was choking, but because breathing no longer seemed necessary. When her hands dropped to her sides, they moved in perfect synchrony with the thing in front of her, as if they were connected by invisible wires. The others saw it happen and tried to keep their distance from their own doubles, but the room was closing in. Every ripple along the walls widened, bending the space until angles no longer made sense. A table in one corner seemed to stretch to the ceiling, a chair leg curved like wet clay. The geometry of the cafeteria had begun to collapse in on itself, folding space the way a hand folds paper. The duplicates advanced one careful step at a time. A man named Victor, a janitor who'd worked at St. Elric's for 27 years, whispered to no one in particular, "I saw this once before." He was shaking, but his eyes were fixed on Elias. The boy, he was here in 91, looked the same, didn't age a day. The walls opened then too. People went in and didn't come back. Elias didn't deny it. He simply looked at Victor and said, "You remembered. That's rare." The group tried to push toward the kitchen door, but every exit was wrong. One doorway showed a long hallway lined with doors that pulsed faintly as if breathing. Another revealed a room full of hospital beds occupied by patients who sat up in unison to stare at them. A third door led to nothing at all, just a sheer drop into darkness. Panic spread quickly. Someone screamed. That sound seemed to draw the duplicates closer. They moved faster now, some crossing the space between them in impossible skipping motions, appearing inches from their originals without crossing the intervening floor. A nurse now. Med Harper swung a metal tray at her duplicate's head. The blow connected, but there was no sound, no resistance. The tray passed through like smoke. The duplicate didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned forward until its face was an inch from hers, and whispered something so quietly that no one else could hear. Harper collapsed instantly, her body limp. Her double caught her before she hit the floor, holding her upright like a puppet. Elias stepped into the center of the chaos. His voice was calm, but it carried through the warped air like a clear bell. "Listen to me. If you fight them, you lose. If you follow them, you disappear. The only way to survive is to refuse both." "Refuse how?" someone shouted. "You stop existing for them," Elias said. "You stop being someone they can copy." It made no sense, but he demonstrated. He closed his eyes, stood perfectly still, and seemed to sink into himself, not physically, but in presence. The air around him felt thinner, as if he'd stepped sideways out of the moment. His duplicate, which had been approaching from the right, stopped mid-step, tilting its head like it had lost track of him. After a few seconds, it turned and walked back into a ripple, dissolving into the black. But not everyone could mimic what he'd done. Fear was too loud in them. The breathing sound in the room grew heavier, as though the space itself was getting impatient. One by one, the duplicates reached their originals, and with each contact, another person went dark-eyed and silent. Their mouths began to move, not with their own words, but in perfect echo of the thing that had taken them. Victor, the janitor, managed to pull Harper away from her double long enough to drag her behind a table. She didn't resist, but she didn't blink either. "We need to get out," he told Elias. Elias looked at him with something almost like pity. "There is no out. There's only before and after has already started." A ripple opened in the ceiling, revealing not darkness this time, but a vast, colorless landscape stretching to a horizon that curved too steeply to be natural. Figures were moving out there, tall, thin, impossibly far away, yet perfectly visible. They moved like shadows cast on water, bending unnaturally as they approached the opening. The duplicates began to lead their originals toward the nearest ripples. Some originals fought. Others followed willingly, as if hypnotized. Victor turned to Elias again. "Then why are you here? What are you?" Elias blinked slowly, the black stone of his eyes reflecting nothing. I'm what it leaves behind. I'm the part of it that remembers you. Before Victor could respond, his duplicate reached him. It didn't touch him, just looked at him, and Victor's face crumpled, not in fear, but in recognition. "It's me," he whispered, from the other side. The ripple behind them widened, swallowing the table whole. In the end, fewer than a dozen people were still free, and the hospital was still breathing. The survivors stood in a crooked half-circle, backs pressed to what had once been a cafeteria wall. Now it pulsed faintly beneath their shoulders, like skin over something alive. The air smelled different, no longer the mix of stale coffee and disinfectant they knew, but something sweet and metallic, like the breath before lightning strikes. No one spoke, not because they didn't have questions, but because speaking felt dangerous. Every sound seemed to echo too long, as if the room was holding on to it, tasting it. Elias finally broke the silence. "The building isn't a building anymore," he said. "It's turning. It's folding us into its shape." One of the nurses, Hale, broad-shouldered and trembling, shook his head. "You're talking nonsense. This is a hospital." Elias looked at him like you might look at a child who insists the sun goes around the earth. "You think hospitals don't eat people?" Hale started to argue, but then the wall behind him exhaled. Not a draft, not a shift in the vents. A deliberate, warm breath against the back of his neck. He froze. The rest of them saw the spot where he stood sink inward slightly, like a shallow dent forming in soft clay. Harper, still vacant-eyed from whatever her duplicate whispered, turned her head toward the group. She hadn't spoken since she'd been taken and returned, but now she smiled. Small, thin, unsettling. "It knows who's left," she said. No one asked how she knew. From somewhere above, a sharp sound rang out. Not a gunshot, not metal on metal, more like the crack of something enormous shifting under strain. The ceiling trembled, a hairline fracture appeared in the plaster, and through it they saw movement. Not pipes, not wiring, something glistening and wet, flexing slowly like muscle. The group instinctively backed away from it, only to find that the floor beneath them was no longer flat. It sloped, subtly at first, to hen more sharply, guiding them toward the far side of the room. Victor muttered, "It's hurting us." The far wall began to ripple again, but this time it didn't open into blackness. Instead, it revealed another room of the hospital, a hallway lined with doors. The survivors recognized it instantly, the East Wing. But the East Wing had been sealed for years after the fire in '84. No one had gone inside since. Elias stepped toward the opening. "If we're lucky, it's giving us a way through. If we're not..." He trailed off. Hale grabbed his arm. "You're not in charge here, kid. We stick together. We go slow." Elias met his gaze with something between amusement and pity. "If you go slow, it'll have time to know your name. You don't want that." Before anyone could stop him, Elias walked into the ripple. The surface closed behind him, leaving the rest of them staring at an ordinary wall. Panic flared instantly. The group split in argument, half wanting to follow him, half insisting they find another way. That was when they heard the footsteps. They came from the cafeteria entrance, heavy, uneven, accompanied by a faint dragging sound. In the doorway stood 3 figures. At first glance they were just people in hospital gowns, but their proportions were wrong. Arms slightly too long, shoulders too narrow, necks just a little too thin. Their heads tilted forward, and from where the eyes should have been, a faint black mist drifted upward in lazy curls. One of them stepped forward. It didn't walk so much as pivot, like a marionette swinging on invisible strings. Its jaw opened, and the sound that came out was not a voice but a distant memory. Each person in the room heard something different. For Hale, it was his daughter's laugh. For Victor, it was his mother humming in the kitchen. For Harper, it was the whisper that had taken her. The sound drew them forward like a hook in the chest. Victor grabbed Hale's shoulder. "Don't listen." But Hale was already moving. The floor tilted more sharply now, and the survivors found themselves sliding toward the approaching figures. The black mist from their eyes thickened, curling through the air like ink in water. Wherever it touched skin, the skin went pale, then translucent, until veins showed like fine cracks in glass. In desperation, Victor spotted a maintenance hatch near the base of the far wall, a low, rectangular panel half hidden behind an overturned cart. He shouted, "Here!" and threw himself at aid. yanking it open to reveal a narrow crawl space beyond. Without hesitation, he shoved Harper through first. She didn't resist, only kept smiling faintly as she disappeared into the dark. The others followed in a scramble, the dragging footsteps and black mist just behind them. Victor was last. As he crawled through, one of the figures reached out and caught his ankle. The touch burned cold, and for a moment his vision filled with a flat black horizon. Then he wrenched free and slammed the hatch shut. The crawl space was pitch black, the air thick and still. Somewhere ahead, Elias's voice floated back to them, steady and calm. "You're in the spine now," he said. "It can't see you here, but it can still feel you." No one asked what that meant. They just kept crawling. The crawl space felt endless. At first they could hear each other's breathing, uneven, ragged, echoing off the low metal walls, but the longer they crawled, the more the sound seemed to get swallowed, not muted exactly, erased. It was narrow enough that shoulders brushed the sides, the metal cold at first, then slowly warming under their touch as if it were responding. The floor wasn't smooth either. It had a faint, ribbed texture like vertebrae laid end to end. Every few feet they passed sections where the ribs seemed to flex under their weight. Victor was near the back, but even from there he could see Elias up ahead, moving at the same unhurried pace he always did. No panic, no doubt, just crawling forward like someone following a route he'd traveled countless times. "What is this place?" Hale whispered from somewhere in the middle. Elias didn't turn. "You already know. You just don't want to name it." No one replied. The space bent slightly, angling downward, and with the turn came a faint vibration in the walls, steady, rhythmic. It took a moment for them to realize it was a pulse. Hale swallowed hard. "Spine," he muttered. "You meant literal." Elias finally stopped and glanced over his shoulder, the dim light from somewhere far ahead catching in his black eyes. "Every building has bones," he said. "You've just never been inside one while it's still growing." That word, growing, stuck in them like a splinter. Further along, the walls began to change color. The cold silver gray deepened into a mottled red, wet-looking in places. A faint smell of iron filled the air. They passed openings no bigger than a fist, each one pulsing softly, exhaling a damp heat. Harper, still crawling silently, reached out and pressed her fingers to one of them. The wall twitched. Elias hissed sharply, "Don't touch." She drew her hand back, but too late. Something inside the opening had already shifted. A slick, segmented shape emerged for just a second before withdrawing. A bead of something dark and viscous rolled out and hit the floor with a sound that was far too loud for its size. After that, they crawled faster. The tunnel forked ahead. Left sloped upward toward a faint white light. Right descended into deeper shadow. Without hesitation, Elias went right. Victor paused at the junction, glancing toward the pale glow. "Shouldn't we go toward light?" Elias's voice floated back from the darkness. "That's not daylight. That's its eye." The right-hand path narrowed even more, forcing them onto their elbows. The ribs beneath them grew sharper, biting into their forearms. From somewhere behind, there came a distant, muffled sound, a dragging noise, slow but steady. "They're following us," Hale muttered. "No," Elias said without looking back. "It's following me. You're just in the way." No one liked the sound of that, but there was nowhere else to go. They crawled for what felt like hours, the air growing heavier until every breath felt like swallowing warm water. The pulse in the walls sped up, matching their own racing hearts. Occasionally they'd pass narrow vertical slits where the wall seemed thinner. Looking through them was a mistake. Behind the membrane, things moved. Not people, not exactly. Shapes. Some hunched and shuddering, some too tall to be contained, all shifting in jerks like they were being pushed from somewhere else. Harper finally spoke, her voice dreamy, distant. "It's talking to me." Victor glanced back at her. "What is?" "The spine. It remembers everyone who's ever been inside it. They're all still here." No one responded, but everyone moved faster after that. The tunnel eventually widened just enough for them to sit upright. Elias stopped in the center of the space, pressing his palm flat against the wall. The pulse under his hand slowed as though responding to him. "This is the junction," he said. "From here it can send us anywhere in the body." Hale frowned. "Anywhere in the hospital, you mean?" Elias's smile was thin. Hospital, shipwreck, cathedral, battlefield, it's all the same to it. Rooms are just organs. Corridors are just veins. Once you're inside, you're part of it. Before anyone could argue, the wall in front of them split open soundlessly, revealing a vertical shaft lined with the same ribbed texture. From somewhere far above came a faint humming, like a choir singing in a language no one recognized. Elias gestured to it. Up we go. Victor peered into the shaft. And if we don't, Elias's black eyes locked on him, then it'll come down here, and you'll wish you'd climbed. They started upward, hands and feet gripping the ribs, the humming growing louder with each movement. Hal, way up. Harper looked down, her face drained of what little color it had left. It's climbing after us. No one turned to see. They just kept climbing. The shaft narrowed as they climbed, forcing their shoulders in until the ribs scraped against their sides. The humming above grew richer, layered with strange harmonics that made the air tremble in their lungs. It wasn't music. It was a signal, a frequency designed to pull them upward. Victor's arms ached, his palms raw against the ridged surface, but stopping wasn't an option. Behind them, something was coming. He couldn't see it, but he felt it in the way the ribs flexed and shuddered beneath his grip, as though the structure itself was bracing for impact. Harper was just above him, her pale hands moving in steady rhythm, eyes fixed on the glow spilling down from the top of the shaft. Elias was still leading, climbing without effort, his head tilted slightly as though listening to the hum like it was an old friend's voice. They passed small openings in the shaft wall, each no larger than a keyhole. Inside, glimpses of rooms flickered. A surgery theater with blood still dripping from instruments, a long-abandoned ward where beds breathed like sleeping animals, a hallway where shadows moved without any light to cast them. Each vision lasted only a second before dissolving into blackness. Hale grunted, voice strained from the climb. Where are we going, kid? To its mind, Elias answered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The word mind sent a cold wave through the group. Finally, they reached the top, a circular opening that pulsed with faint light. The hum was so loud now it bypassed their ears entirely, vibrating in their bones. Elias pulled himself through first, vanishing into the glow. Harper followed without hesitation. Victor hesitated at the edge, staring into the space above. It wasn't a room, not exactly. It was a dome, lined with a membrane that glistened wetly. Veins as thick as tree roots ran through it, converging at the center where something vast and shapeless floated, suspended in clear fluid. It shifted constantly, forming and unforming shapes, a face, a hand, a corridor, a door, all melting back into formlessness. As soon as Victor entered, the hum stopped. The sudden silence was so sharp it felt like a blade. Hale emerged last, panting. What the hell is that? Elias didn't answer immediately. He stepped toward the center, his reflection warping in the fluid. You're looking at the cortex, the reason this place exists, the thing that dreams the building into shape. The floating mass pulsed, and for a brief moment, Victor thought he heard voices, hundreds of them, whispering different phrases in unison. They weren't speaking to him. They were remembering him, dragging every detail of his life into their collective archive. Hale backed away. I don't want to be here. It doesn't matter what you want, Elias said quietly. You were inside it the moment you walked through the front doors. The only choice now is whether you leave through its mouth or become part of the dream. Before anyone could speak, the membrane above them quivered. From somewhere far below, a distant scream rose through the shaft, growing louder until it merged with the silence, creating a pressure in their skulls. Something was climbing fast, faster than anything human could. The cortex shifted again, this time forming the unmistakable outline of a door. It glowed faintly, suspended just above the fluid surface. Elias turned to the others. That's the way out, but it will cost you something. What kind of something? Victor asked, his voice dry. Elias's eyes, black as ever, didn't blink. A memory it likes, one it will keep forever. You'll never get it back. Hale shook his head violently. No, not doing that. The scream in the shaft grew louder. Whatever was coming was almost here. The air in the dome trembled with its approach. Harper stepped forward first. Without a word, she touched the glowing door. Her eyes rolled back, her lips parting in a silent gasp. When she pulled her hand away, she was smiling faintly, emptily. The door flared brighter. She stepped through and was gone. Elias gestured sharply. Next. Victor hesitated. Somewhere deep inside he felt the building reaching for him, sifting through his life like fingers rifling pages. It lingered on one moment, the sound of his brother's laugh when they were kids, playing in the rain. He knew instantly that if he touched the door, that laugh would vanish from him forever. Behind them, the first shadow of the thing in the shaft appeared, impossibly tall and bending wrong at every joint. Victor put his hand on the door. The instant Victor's fingers touched the glowing surface, heat flooded through his arm, not burning, but invasive, like something was pouring into his veins. His vision collapsed inward, narrowing to a single memory, the rain, the mud, the sharp metallic scent of wet earth, and his younger brother's laugh, high, wild, unrestrained. The laugh echoed once, twice, and then stopped. The memory didn't fade. It was cut. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, like a page torn from a book so cleanly you'd swear it had never been written. He gasped as the absence bloomed inside him, an aching hollow where something warm used to live. The door pulsed once and opened wider. Without thinking, Victor stepped through. It wasn't light on the other side. It was absence, like stepping into a place where nothing had ever existed. No air, no gravity, no sound. He was falling without moving, and the only thing anchoring him was the faint pull of something ahead, something that might be a way back to the world. Behind him, through the still open doorway, Hale stood frozen, staring at the shadow climbing out of the shaft. It was in full view now. It wasn't a creature in any normal sense. It was as though the walls themselves had peeled up and taken shape, a living knot of the building's own material, bone and tendon flexing under sheets of dark, wet stone. Where a face should have been, there was only a deep recess, and inside it, dozens of black eyes stared unblinking. The thing moved with the sound of tearing fabric and splintering wood. The ribs along the shaft walls snapped outward to make room for its bulk. As it pulled itself into the dome, the cortex pulsed in recognition. Elias spoke without looking at it. "It doesn't want you dead, it wants you integrated." Hale shook his head, backing toward the door. "Not me, no way." "You think it cares what you want?" Elias said flat. The thing took another step, and the temperature in the dome dropped. Frost bloomed along the membrane walls, cracking as the veins inside them constricted. Hale made his decision. He lunged forward, slapped his palm to the door, and screamed. The cortex had found something it liked. Hale's scream wasn't from pain, but from recognition. Whatever memory it took, it was one that defined him, one that held the weight of who he thought he was. His eyes went wide as it disappeared from him forever, his voice breaking into hoarse silence. The door widened again. Hale staggered through, still shaking. That left Elias. The thing from the shaft had stopped moving, its many eyes locked entirely on him. The cortex pulsed again, more insistently, almost. Eager. Victor, still drifting in the absence beyond the door, could feel the tension in the room they'd just left. He turned back in time to see Elias approach the cortex, but instead of touching the door, he pressed his palm flat to the fluid surface surrounding the central mass. The reaction was instant. The cortex convulsed, the veins in the walls thickening, the membrane stretching as though breathing faster. The thing from the shaft sank to its knees, if it even had knees, lowering its many eyes in something that looked disturbingly like reverence. Elias whispered something Victor couldn't hear, and then the dome erupted in light. For a heartbeat, Victor saw everything, hallways folding into each other like paper, rooms blooming and rotting in seconds, doorways leading to oceans, deserts, cities that didn't exist. And beneath it all, the endless pulse of something alive, something aware. Then the light snapped shut. Elias stepped toward the door, unshaken, his black eyes fixed on Victor. "It remembers you now," he said softly. "That means it can find you." He stepped through. The door vanished, and Victor was alone in the nothing. A shape began to form ahead. Street lamps, pavement, the faint sound of cars. The real world, or something close enough to it. He started toward it, feeling earned, then the absence of his brother's laugh with every step. But somewhere far behind him, in the dark he couldn't see, the hum started again, and it was getting closer. The air hit him first, wet, heavy and sour, like a street after a summer storm. Asphalt shimmered under the dim glow of street lamps, and somewhere far off, a siren wailed. Victor stepped onto the pavement, shoes clicking against the curb, and for a moment he almost convinced himself it was over. Almost. The world was wrong in ways too small to name but too sharp to ignore. The street lamps were taller than they should have been, each one bending slightly toward the road as if straining to hear something. The cars that passed moved just a little too slowly, their headlights a fraction dimmer than real light. And the people, there were people, walked without meeting his gaze, their movements stiff and rehearsed, like they were following a script they hadn't practiced enough. Victor turned in a slow circle. Behind him, where the hotel should have been, there was only a narrow alley that ended in a brick wall. No sign of room 9, no sign of the dome, no sign of Elias. But the hum was still there. Faint now, a suggestion in the base of his skull. Hale stumbled out from a side street, looking like he'd been dropped from a great height. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes darting at every passing figure. "It's not the same," he whispered. Victor stared at him. "What did it take from you?" Hale swallowed hard but didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the lampposts, then to the buildings, and then back to Victor. "We shouldn't stay here." They moved together, down streets that felt like familiar neighborhoods stripped for parts. A diner with no name on the sign, a bus stop with no schedule posted, storefront windows that reflected them at half a beat's delay. At an intersection, a man in a trench coat stopped and turned toward them. His face was a blur, like someone had smeared wet paint across his features. When he spoke, the sound was layered. One human voice, and beneath it, the same deep frequency they'd heard in the dome. "It's looking," the man said. "It remembers you." Victor froze. "Who?" The man tilted his head. "You know who." The light changed, and the man stepped off the curb. Halfway across the street, he simply wasn't there anymore. Hale grabbed Victor's shoulder. "We need to find the others." "The others?" "Harper, Elias, whoever else it's marked. We're not done." Victor wanted to argue, to tell Hale they were out and that was enough, but the truth pressed against the back of his teeth. They weren't out. They'd just been moved. A bus roared past, its windows dark. For the briefest second, Victor thought he saw the cortex inside, its shifting mass pressing against the glass, and then it was gone. Somewhere nearby, a door slammed. The hum rose a little louder. They weren't in their world. Not entirely. They found the coffee shop by accident. It was wedged between two shuttered storefronts on a street Victor swore hadn't been there an hour ago. The windows were fogged, but light glowed warmly from inside. Above the door, a small wooden sign read only, "Open." No name, no hours, nothing else. When Victor tried to pass it, Hale grabbed his sleeve. "Look again." Victor turned back, and the sign had changed. Now it read, "We've been expecting you." Inside, the air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and something sweet, almost metallic. The place was quiet except for the faint crackle of an old record playing somewhere in the back. There were only 3 tables, each lit by a single overhead bulb. At the farthest one sat Harper. She wasn't drinking her coffee. She wasn't even looking at it. Her gaze was fixed on the wall beside her, where faint ripples moved across the plaster like something breathing underneath. When she finally noticed them, her expression didn't change. "You made it," she said flatly. Victor slid into the chair across from her. "Where are we?" Harper shrugged. "Somewhere between. The people who've been touched by it. We find each other here. It's not a choice." Hale scanned the room. The barista behind the counter was motionless, head lowered, hands clasped as if in prayer. Every so often, his fingers twitched in an odd rhythm. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slower ones. Victor leaned forward. "What did it take from you?" Harper's eyes flickered. "My mother's voice. I can still remember her, but I can't remember what she sounded like. Not even when she sang to me." No one spoke for a moment. The record in the back skipped once, twice, then settled. The door opened and a chill rolled in, not from cold air, but from recognition. Elias walked in, coat buttoned high, eyes darker than before. He carried nothing but the way the barista straightened wool. Hen he entered was like a soldier standing for a commanding officer. He sat without asking. "It's still looking for you." Victor's jaw tightened. "Then tell me how to stop it." Elias gave a small, humorless smile. "You don't stop something like that. You either stay ahead of it, or you join it." Hale's voice cracked. "Join it?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. a small brass key worn smooth by countless hands. It had no teeth, just a rounded shaft. "It's not for a door," Elias said. "It's for a choice." Harper looked from the key to Elias. "Why give it to us?" "Because you've already been chosen," he replied, "and the only way to survive what's coming is to choose first." Victor glanced toward the wall Harper had been staring at earlier. The ripples were stronger now, pulsing in time with the hum in his skull. The barista whispered something then, too soft to catch, but the tone was unmistakable. A warning. The record stopped. The hum grew louder. The hum didn't fade. It settled, thick and low, like it had rooted itself inside the coffee shop walls. Victor felt it in his teeth, in the back of his eyes, a vibration that made every breath feel heavier. Elias tapped the brass key once against the table. "There are 3 ways out," he said quietly. "Each one costs something different. You don't get to know the price until you've already paid." Victor glanced at the 3 tables. The one they sat at was lit with a faint amber glow. Across the room, the second table's bulb flickered as though underwater. The third was in the far corner, its light almost too bright to look at, casting harsh shadows that didn't match the furniture. Harper kept her gaze on the wall. "Which one's the safest?" Elias smirked without warmth. "Safety isn't on the menu." Hale leaned toward the key. "And that? It lets you choose a table. Without it, the shop chooses for you." The barista moved from behind the counter. His footsteps made no sound on the wooden floor. He stopped at the second table and placed 3 empty cups there, their insides black as tar. Without looking up, he whispered, "One table takes your past. One takes your future. One takes what you are now." Victor's mouth went dry. "And if you lose all 3? The barista's head tilted slightly. "Then there's nothing left for it to take. You're free, in the truest, most useless sense of the word." A sudden draft swept through the shop, carrying with it the faint scent of damp concrete. The ripples in the wall thickened, pushing outward as if something behind it was pressing its face against the plaster. Elias stood. "It's almost here. Decide." Victor reached for the key, but Harper's hand shot out and grabbed it first. She didn't speak. She simply rose and walked to the flickering lit table. The moment she sat, the cups filled with black liquid that reflected not her phase. Key, but a younger version of her, laughing, untouched. She didn't drink. The light above her went out and she was gone. No sound, no movement, just absence. Hale swore under his breath. "Future or now?" he muttered, eyes darting between the other 2 tables. Victor didn't answer. His gaze had locked on the wall. The plaster was splitting, thin cracks spiderwebbing outward, the hum now so loud it felt like the air itself was shaking. The barista looked at him with hollow eyes. "It's not patient." Elias stepped toward the bright-lit table. "I told you, stay ahead of it or join it." He sat, the light flared, and Elias smiled. Victor's fingers trembled over the key. The bright-lit table seemed to burn in the corner of his vision, its shadows writhing against the floor like living things. The amber-lit table in front of him felt safer. But safety was a lie here. He knew that now. Hale's breath came fast beside him. "We can still run," he whispered. "Forget the tables. Just leave." But the barista's voice cut through the air, sharp as glass. "There is no outside until you've chosen. Doors are decoration until the price is paid." The cracks in the wall deepened, dust falling like pale snow. Something was moving behind it. Slow, deliberate, testing its strength. The hum had become a deep, resonant growl. Victor closed his eyes. Past, future, now. He tried to imagine each loss, to weigh which would leave him standing. The amber light above his own table dimmed, almost imperceptibly, as if the choice were being made for him. "No," Victor muttered. "Not yet." He stood and moved toward the bright-lit table. The shadows recoiled as he approached, slithering back into the corners. The light itself was harsh, almost surgical, revealing every imperfection in the wood grain, every scuff on his shoes. Elias was gone. The chair across from him sat empty, but the seat was still warm. Victor lowered himself into it. The moment he did, a single cup appeared before him, clear glass, filled with something that looked like water, but shimmered with faint colors just beneath the surface. The barista's voice came from directly behind him. "Drink, and you will no longer be who you are," Hale called out from across the room. "Don't! You don't know what it'll take." Victor stared at his reflection in the glass. It looked back at him without blinking. Then, slowly it smiled, though he hadn't. The cracks in the wall split wide. A pale hand, long-fingered and wrong, slid through, its nails scraping the floor. The hum was deafening. Victor drank. It was cold, colder than anything he'd ever felt, spreading through his chest, into his veins, up behind his eyes. Memories twisted, reshaped. He felt his name dissolve first, then the idea of his own voice, then the tether between thought and self. When he set the glass down, his reflection was gone. The barista stepped aside, and the wall shattered inward. The wall didn't just break, it folded, peeling itself away like wet paper. Behind it was no other room, no street, no sky, just an expanse of shifting black, streaked with veins of dim, pulsing light, as if the night itself had a heartbeat. The thing stepped through. Its shape was human only in the sense that it had 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. The proportions were wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in ways they shouldn't. Its skin was translucent, showing that same shimmering substance that had been in Victor's glass, swirling beneath the surface. Where its face should have been was a smooth plane, featureless except for the faintest indentation where eyes might have been. But Victor felt its gaze, like a weight settling on him, pinning him in place. Hale stumbled backward, but the barista didn't move. He simply bowed, head lowered. The hum was no longer a sound. It was a presence inside Victor's skull, a second set of thoughts pressing against his own. "We are the same now," it whispered. Victor's mouth opened, but the words that came weren't his. "The choice has been made." Hale's voice shook. "What choice? You didn't even—" "He did," the entity said, though its smooth face never moved. Its voice came from everywhere at once, layered with countless echoes. "He chose to give away what bound him to himself. Now he belongs here." The shop around them began to warp, the tables melting into the floor, the light bulbs stretching into long, glassy tendrils. The smell of coffee was gone, replaced by the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic. Hale's hands clenched at his sides. "Then take me instead." The entity turned toward him. "You have not yet been chosen." A dozen black cracks raced across the air itself like fractures in glass. Through them, Victor saw flashes, other rooms, other people at other tables, making other choices. Some screamed, some laughed, some simply vanished. The barista's voice was calm. "It doesn't matter how you came here. The building always gets what it wants." Victor felt the pull then, like invisible hands drawing him toward the entity. Not just his body, but his thoughts, his sense of self, sliding into something vaster, colder. The hum grew until it filled everything. Hale's shout was distant now. "Fight it!" Victor looked down at his hands. They were no longer entirely his, translucent, veins filled with liquid light. The last thing he saw before the darkness closed over him was the door swinging open, revealing another lost soul stepping inside the shop. The next one to choose.